Welcome to the series, The Power of Principle Thinking by Dr. Gerald Mann. Dr. Mann is the senior pastor at the Riverbend Church in Austin, Texas. Let's join Dr. Mann for more of The Power of Principle Thinking.
I believe in a power of principle thinking. I believe in positive thinking. I believe in possibility thinking. I believe in all that good stuff. I've cut my teeth on Norman Vincent Peale, and I think he's one of the great men of our century. But I believe that the Bible teaches the power of principle thinking, that when life falls in or whenever you face something in life, there are principles that are etched into the foundation of your life that you need to draw on. And so that's what this series is all about. And today's principle goes like this. Trouble is a trigger. And I want to use a famous passage on trouble and life's suffering, written to the early Christians who were dying because they believed. They didn't have it easy like we do. And James, probably they think it's James, the brother of our Lord Jesus Christ, wrote to these suffering people. It's in James, the first chapter, verse 2. And he says, "My friends, consider all kinds of trouble a blessing." That's what he says. Consider all kinds of trouble a blessing. "For you know that when your faith is tested, it turns into endurance, toughness. So let your toughness build you up to full maturity, so that you'll be deficient in nothing. But when you know that you are deficient, then ask God for maturity, for he is always ready to give generously. But you must ask trusting, not doubting. For anyone who is uncertain about God's intentions is like a wave in a storm at sea, tossed to and fro. A person who doesn't know God as a trusted friend should not expect to get very much from him." Power of principle thinking. Trouble is a trigger. You know, for the early days of psychiatric treatment, they formed their views of human nature by studying sick people. One of the first psychiatrists to form a view of human nature by studying healthy people was a little Jewish man named Fritz Perls, and he was a founder of something called Gestalt therapy. But about 30 years ago, he was at a conference, and somebody asked him to define what he did. And he said, "Well, I envision everybody standing by a river. It's got rushing water if they fall in. And there's a rock here and a rock there and a rock over there." And he says, "My job is to help them get the courage to leap from the bank to the first rock. And then to get them to leap to the next rock. And then to the next rock till I help them across." And some wag in the audience said, "What if they fall in?" And little Fritz Perls, with his hawkish face, looked over his glasses and he said, "Who said that?" And he found the guy and he said, "Young man, don't you know it is better to fall in than to stand on the bank wishing?" And then he said something that every motivational speaker and pop psychologist has now captured as a motto. He was the first one who ever uttered the great phrase, "There is no gain without fame." But then he said something else that hardly anybody ever quotes. And it really set off something in my brain. He said, "People who spend their whole lives trying to avoid trouble are never fully born." And he went on to say, trouble can either trigger disintegration, crater you, tear you up, or it can trigger reintegration. It can trigger human growth. There's nothing like trouble to trigger human growth. And that's exactly what James said 2,000 years ago to those suffering Christians who were dying for their faith. Let trouble be your trigger. And he talks about the three things that trouble triggers. First, he says trouble triggers what I call tough faith. There are different kinds of faith. Most of us grow up with a kind of unexamined faith. If you and I were in Iraq today, if we'd been born in Iraq and raised in the Muslim faith, we would think America's the great Satan. And we would think that all of us here gathered in this church are Satan's little devils. Because most of us grow up without examining or testing what we believe. We just get it from somebody else and we swallow it and we regurgitate it when somebody asks us to. And then there's fair weather faith, where people believe in God because it's comfortable and it's the thing to do and life's going pretty good. Tough faith is the kind of faith that the Bible talks about. And that's the kind where you go on and believe and obey and trust God when all of the evidence is against it. There's a great story tucked back in 1 Kings, the 17th chapter. God tells the prophet Elijah to go to a little village called Zarephath. The Bible has a lot of nice names. Zarephath. Go to this village, he says, and there's a widow there who's going to feed you. So he goes to this little village, and as he's coming in, he sees this widow, who he knows she's a widow the way she's dressed, gathering firewood, and he goes up to her and he says, God told me if I came here you would take me in and feed me. And she said, as God is my witness, sir, I have one little handful of flour and one little cup of oil left, and I'm out here gathering wood to make the last meal for my son and me before we starve to death. And in those days that literally happened, because there's no one to help widows. And the prophet Elijah said to the woman, God has promised that if you will make me a little meal, the bowl will not run out of flour and the jar will not run out of oil. And so, against all odds, she believes God, and it says she fed him a big meal, and the bowl didn't run out of flour and the jar didn't run out of oil. Now that's tough faith. I learned my first lesson in tough faith 30 years ago today. I never forget September the 2nd, 1960. I was 22 years old. I was just out of college. Lois and I were moving from college to the seminary. We had a wreck. We lost everything we had. Lois was in critical condition. Took us a month and a half to get well. On the 1st of August, we moved to Fort Worth, rented a little house. It was over 100 degrees. We had one fan that the blade had been bit in the wreck. And it was so bad that I stuck my hand in it one night and it didn't even bruise me. It wouldn't even make a deal. Anyway, I don't want to spend all morning except to say I started beating the streets for a job. Our daughter was deaf. Lois couldn't work. So I started looking for a job that allowed me to go to school and support my family. For a solid month, every student at Southwestern Seminary was looking for a job. I didn't have a job. September the 1st came, and we were down to $4. Went across the street, and I said to the landlady, I don't have any money to pay September's rent. Could you stake me for 2 weeks? She said, what are you going to do in 2 weeks? I said, lady, if I got to get out and wash your sidewalk with a toothbrush, I'll do it. But can you give me 2 weeks? And I guess she looked at me and looked at the baby and looked at Lois, and she said, I should never gotten into this business. You can have 2 weeks. So we had $4 left. We had to decide whether to put gasoline in the car because it was almost empty or buy the baby milk. Well, I prayed and I bought the baby milk. And we were sitting there wondering what we were going to do, and the landlady hollered from across the street. We didn't have a phone, and said, somebody wants you on the phone. And I ran across the street. In a month, my first day in Fort Worth, I had applied for a job at a cottonseed oil mill. And they said, you can have the job. The guy we were going to hire, you were second on the list, can't come, and you got the job if you can come to work tonight. Now, you got to work the night shift. Well, that was great because I had to go to school during the daytime. He said, and it gets kind of boring because at night only 2 or 3 cottonseed trucks come in, and you're supposed to weigh them in and weigh them out, so you'll have a lot of time on your hands to study. So I ran up there, and I got there, and the car was on empty, and I thought, I got to find out when I'm going to get paid. So I ran down to the plant, and the boss was standing there with a bunch of guys, and I said, when do we get paid? He said, 2 weeks. I said, I can't live for 2 weeks. I got enough milk for my baby for 2 or 3 days. I don't have any gas in the car. He said, well, this plant is owned by Procter & Gamble, and they have a policy, no advanced wages. And I said, you don't understand. I don't have anything to eat. I can't feed my family. I have a baby. He said, the rules is the rules. If you don't want the job, don't take it. I said, I'll take the job. He turned and walked away. This ain't a preacher story. This is the truth. A black man came walking over there sweaty. He scooped cottonseed for $1 an hour, 8 hours a day. And he reached into his old sweaty pocket and he pulled out a crumpled bill and gave it to me, and I opened it up. It was a $10 bill. And I said, man, you can't afford this. He said, that's right, but I got chickens, and I got a garden, and I got food. And he said, I can't afford it, but I knows what it sounds like to hear your baby cry when he's hungry. Now, if you don't believe in miracles, that's your problem, okay? But tough faith's when you go on and believe that God will do what he says he'll do when you've run out of everything else. I don't want to ever go back to that. But I tell you what, I learned what it means to be without everything but the support of God. Trouble triggers tough faith if you let it. Second thing James says is that trouble triggers what I call total character. He says, let your toughness, consider all troubles a blessing. It'll build toughness. And let your toughness build you to total full maturity. And you'll be deficient in nothing. He didn't say you'll have everything you want. He said you'll have total character. Trouble triggers total character. There's nothing like trouble to round out a person's character. In the 30 years I've been pastoring churches, the people who amaze me the most are those who never get perturbed when things go bad, or they blow up and get over it real quick. They're not easily offended. They don't gripe. They just come Sunday after Sunday. They got a smile on their face. They do what God's asked them to do. And in almost every case, you'll find some people who've had some deep, deep hurts in their lives. Hurting somehow rounds out character. Thomas Carlyle said, God rarely uses anybody greatly until he's allowed them to suffer deeply. I was at a meeting not long ago, about 500 people from AA and 12-step programs. And those are the most amazing people I ever spent a weekend with. There were some horror stories there you would not believe. One man at the end of the meeting called me aside and told me his story. And I thought I had heard the worst. I'd heard every kind of thing you can imagine. This guy said, I was tied up by some hooligans and made to watch while my wife and my daughter were raped and murdered. I started drinking. I tried to kill myself. For some reason, I can't tell you why, I spiraled out of that, and I got in a 12-step program. And today he's a sponsor for many drunks who've been through tragedy. And this man had a serenity about him that I couldn't believe. And driving home, I thought, if something like that happened to me, I would absolutely go to pieces. But trouble had triggered character in this man. So the next time the world falls in on you, remember, trouble's a trigger for tough faith and total character. And then James adds one more thing. He says trouble triggers what I call true prayer. There are different kinds of prayer. There's the kind where people think that to pray you have to alter your consciousness. I used to think that. We Americans are big into altering our consciousness. We take drugs, we take alcohol, we go into all kinds of sporting and recreational events. We had a birthday party at our house last night for an 18-year-old, and I tell you how they alter their consciousness. It's going boom, 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 boom. And, you know, the whole neighborhood was pulsating. And I noticed they weren't dancing. And they weren't talking to you. How could you talk? They were all in. And, you know, after about an hour, I was going like that with them. People in our society use prayer that way, to alter consciousness. Some people think you hadn't prayed unless you work yourself into some auto-suggestive trance of some kind. I studied the yogas and Buddhism and Shintoism in the East, and I can tell you there is some very valuable mental and physical benefit from meditation. But working yourself into a trance is not prayer. It's not what the Bible calls prayer. And, of course, a lot of people think prayer is some sort of magical manipulation. You say all the right words, thee and thou and amen and hearts and minds, and somehow you can pull the slot machine in the sky and God will bless you. That's not prayer. Prayer is what James talks about. He said, when you ask God, when you know you're lacking and you ask God for maturity, ask trusting. And I kept reading that over and over in the Greek, and what he's talking about is prayer is simply an intimate visit with a trusted friend. You have a trusted friend, I hope. If you don't, you're very poor. I hope you have somebody you can share your innermost soul with. Everybody needs a person like that. God has blessed me with a wife that way. We've thought about getting a divorce several times, and we decided that wasn't right. Maybe murder would do, but not divorce. But in each case, we've restrained ourselves because we knew we would also lose our best friends. I have some men friends and women friends that I can share the innermost hurts of my life with. That is only a shadow of what prayer is meant to be. Prayer is an intimate visit with a trusted friend called God. I've been reading the thoughts of a man named Pascal who lived in the 1700s, died when he was 39 years old. He invented the computer, and he discovered atmospheric pressure, the whole science of hydraulics. But he was foremost a Christian seeker. And he lost his sister, whom he loved, was his closest friend, and he became ill. And toward his death, when all of life had fallen in on him, he said, I have lived with three great delusions in my life. The delusion that I could shape my own destiny, the delusion I could create my own happiness, and the delusion that I could construct my own security. And he says it was out of these three delusions that I came to know what a joke my life was. And through my suffering, I have been driven to seek out God, who is a trusted friend. So let me finish by asking you, how do you handle your troubles? Those deep hurts, maybe you've never had one of those, but it doesn't matter. Those little nuisances all added up are as bad as one great big one. How do you handle your trouble? You have a choice. It can be a trigger to disintegrate you or to reintegrate you. I love that old hymn, I Wish I Could Sing. I would start singing it right now. I heard a preacher the other day could sing, and he got to the end of his sermon, and the guy hit the note, and he broke out singing. I wish I could sing. I may try. You ready? No. There's a great old hymn that says, lay your burden down. Lay your burden down. Bring your worries, I say troubles, to the cross, and lay your burden down. I haven't had many original ideas, but one I had several years ago was that River Bend has got to be a family where people can come and dump their garbage on Sunday, where they can come and empty it all out and start all over. What we do for Christ is when we leave here that counts. When we come, is to lay our burdens down. What do you do with your troubles? Do you let them trigger tough faith and total character and true prayer, or do you let them eat at you and destroy you? The promise we have in Christ is that we can lay our burdens down. And I hope you find that freedom.
Thank you for joining us for the series, The Power of Principle Thinking. For information on other audio tapes or books by Dr. Gerald Mann, please call 1-800-388-9500 or write to Gerald Mann Ministries, Post Office Box 160-100, Austin, Texas 78716. You can now select the next tape in the series, The Power of Principle Thinking, from Dr. Gerald Mann.